Merci, merci à tous et à toutes. Nous allons finir.
Thank you. Now we'll finish the morning with a wonderful story. The title is Let's Not Be Afraid of Chaos. And now I'll ask for Elisabeth Ducoté to come up and join me for this interview. So in this chaotic, disturbed world, there's a company that's doing very well called CHAM. It's a French company that I think most of you know that makes compression stockings and for lymphatic and so I think all of us have worn compression stockings of some kind or another in our lives, and they date back to 1847, and you used to make ribbons in the 19th century. But in your career, you were a speech therapist. So, and then your father in 1991 had a stroke, and you took over the company. But you were in another profession originally. And then if we look at 1991, 24 million in turnover, 4 million for export, and 285 employees. And today, there are 220 million in sales, 74 for export, and over 2,000 employees in several countries all over the world. So congratulations. So congratulations for this wonderful growth. So what are the 3 key words behind your success? Well, if you will, we always had 3 cardinal virtues that we tried to hand down from one generation to the next. One is sustainability. We work in the long term, and French industry must be sustainable. So sustainability is one thing, and when we receive a mandate as mine, as the CEO, we must hand this down to the next person who will in turn hand it to the next person. And then there's also frugality. If you want to place most of our resources where they're the most important in other words, innovation, industrial investment, and internationalization, we must be very frugal in every other area. So our resources must be concentrated on what is essential. And then the third quality is agility. We must be able to challenge ourselves at all times and say that what we've acquired and our temporary, this basket's only temporary, there will be new baskets in the future. So we always need to be able to be on the rebound and looking at new things. What did you have to? Well, I did have to abandon my career as a speech therapist, but I don't believe that there's a single pathway to arrive in a corporate world. And I said, well, yes, I'm a psychologist and a speech therapist working with very disabled children, and I decided to end that career, and I was aware that the relational skills that I had working with the children would help me in my new career. And so our experience always helps us. It's always a tool, even if we have atypical career paths such as mine.
And your experience as at the age of 20, that's something. You took over your company at that age, so that helped you when you suddenly had to take over, I imagine, your experience. Yes, it's important in these companies that are based on heritage. It's very important to keep in mind rights and duties. You need to think about that very early, so that I had to carry the values of my father, my grandfather. It was an obligation. And today what I can say is that because I wasn't initially from industry, today I find that it is very interesting and exciting. Are you preparing your children to take over? Yes, I am. They have carried out business studies, but they've all been through different kinds of professional experience, so they have been prepared. They are prepared. My daughter is now the general manager and works at my side. How did you integrate digital technology, and when did you feel that things were changing and you said to yourselves, did you understand very quickly that it was essential, or did you think that it wouldn't be useful? Well, if you like, there was a trigger, seeing all the French tech in the healthcare field. There was a lot of French tech There are many startups working in the healthcare sector, especially in medical devices. And so we said, well, we can't just stay apart from that because otherwise we'll get to the end of a cycle and there will be no future for us. So this emergence of new technologies, new solutions, new managerial categories, because people don't want to work in companies, they want to create their companies. All of that, this obligation to be as the French fab, as we say, to all of these French companies that have an industry, that have an organizer, this French fab that we represent with respect to the French state, we said we absolutely need to find alliances and gateways. And so we created places where we could work with tech companies. So we worked in the space and Agora so that we could work with tech companies, get into contact with them without actually eating them up. Because if you do that, it means that you're removing a certain freedom and independence. So we hosted these companies. Sometimes we set up partnerships with others. We bought some of the stock, the shares. And we looked at the conditions that we were working on and got them to lumber pathologies, where we have created a certain number of alliances. So on Monday morning, we've got a new app with all of our different lumber belts, explaining to the patient what they should be doing, which one they should be using, which exercises they should be doing. So we're now beginning to have, this has started 2 or 3 years ago, we've started our digital era, and we're seeing the results. But just to come back to the title of our discussion, chaos is there. There is chaos. You get to the end of a cycle like the end of the cycle in our industry. We're not in the new cycle. There are periods of uncertainty. There are periods where you've got to create a new operating mode, and that's chaotic, but we mustn't be afraid of chaos. Chaos can be useful. It's constructive. Yes, it is constructive. It is when you're moving from an established order to a new order that's going to be set up for the future, and chaos, it's that, passageway. There's got to be a certain amount of freedom. You've got to be able to reinvent. You've got to be able to change, and you've got to allow different cultural shocks, but you've also got to apply a certain amount of discipline. And this chaos for me, as a manager, while I felt that it was important to embrace it, and it's normal that a manager does this. It means that you can secure the environment. This chaos did create a certain number of fears. And one of the first response was say, okay, now children, our company will have to close down. We don't want to see what's happening in the environment because it makes us frightened. But it's quite the opposite that we did, and that was necessary. So we created a permeable membrane with exchanges possible with the city, with the French tech companies, with the university, with labs. For example, in the Rhône-Alpes region, there are some very interesting labs. There are many, many labs working on medical electronics and other laboratories as well, reminding us of what we have in the MIT in the United States. But there are two things that are important for the future. You've got to focus on innovation that is destructive. And I liked the previous panel discussion in France today. Destructive innovation takes so long that sometimes it's rather discouraging. Sometimes you want to do things differently because it's welcomed administratively better in Germany than in France. So we need to tell our public powers that they must help us. They must facilitate the path with destructive innovation. And then there is this fear that takes us to a new industrial era, and that's very important. And I was hearing some very interesting things this morning. There will be certain jobs that will be lost. Things will be automated. But on the contrary, in industry, we'll be creating new jobs with different value, different added value, marketing people, engineers, technicians, etc. A country without industry, unlike what we said years ago, is an invertebrate country. And it's very important that our public powers need to realize that, and so that we have some good news in this field. So do you actually go and see your staff? Do you pull up your sleeves and work with them? I love factories. I love the people who work in factories. It's a very noble job. Of course, industry must not disavow this. It's fundamental, it's structuring, and, this is, where your products come from. But so you put up your sleeves, you work, you're co-president, you are co-president of an organization for PM, small to medium-sized enterprises. Well, there are some companies that don't have the right kind of size. They're too small for several reasons. But mainly, these reasons are environmental reasons, and they're because of the ecosystem in which we work. In other words, 20, 30, 40 years, there was no focus on these SMEs. They have an identity, and they've only had an identity since 2008 in Germany. They've had a status for decades. So these companies, they're just beginning to attract the public powers today. And it's true that there need to be more of these. They're going to be investing in their local areas so that they are no longer deserts. Take Saint-Étienne and the Loire region. There have been some terrible economic trials. There is practically nobody left. So it's very important to reinvest in these areas where employment needs to be created. And so this is one of the major combats that we have to lead. But it's also a source of hope. It's also a source of hope, given what's just happened. So account is being taken of these companies and their ability to take up part of the French economy. They represent 1/4 of the French economy, and even a little bit more if you take exports. So 32% of exports, whereas, in fact, they only account for 25%. So they're even over-exporting, which is a good sign. When you were faced with governments who were not really interested, and there were all these administrative tests, did you think about relocating at all? No, not relocating, because the local area is very much in my genes. Saint-Étienne has been involved in making very difficult kinds of fabric, elastic fabric. We will not be moving from Saint-Étienne. We have our know-how. We have our employees who know how to do what we do. So we can't, ask the public powers to help them if we don't help the public powers. So we will be loyal. We'll remain loyal to our original area, Saint-Étienne. But, of course, we do have factories in Germany and elsewhere. What about with your trade union representatives? How do you get on with them? It's a small-sized company, so is everybody pulling towards the same direction? We have a good relationship with them, even if from time to time, it's quite vigorous from adult to adult, between adults. It's better to have this kind of relationship than for everybody to shut up. So you're for the hard kind of trade unionism. Well, I'm for dialogue. I'm for dialogue, and that can be quite vigorous dialogue. Thank you very much.